That's so cool. Starting in on that awesome shirt. Love it.
Thank you. Yes, public radio, public library, public land, public transit, public television, public parks, public education, public art.
Public art. Oh,
Yes.
I can't think of anything missed. That's amazing.
Yeah, my
Public
fiance got
resources.
it for me. Yeah, she got it for me, and then I bought. I was like, man, I saw that, and I was gonna buy it, and she's like, I knew it was you. I was like,
Yeah,
yes.
that was a good purchase. The more I hear about her, the more I like her. So,
Oh yeah, she's great.
well, obviously.
Um, yeah, but what we wanted to talk about today were, we are university professors, and we have students. So let's talk about our students.
Let's talk about our students. I love to always preface by you and I both take on the framework of we don't blame the learner, obviously,
Hmm.
because the learner's always right. That's literally
Hmm.
why we named the podcast what we did. So when we talk about our student behavior that might otherwise be deemed as bad behavior, we aren't using a framework of blame. We aren't using a framework of um, trying to punish or anything like that. So I think it's important to just kind of mention that first. Um, so I had an interesting situation come up in a course that I'm teaching where an exam was administered, and because it's all online, it's all asynchronous, the students can just basically like click on it and take the quiz as they need to. This was a pretty substantial amount of points, so high stakes for the grade, and it could really have an impact on where a student ends up in the final grade. So the student reported that they accidentally clicked on the link and didn't realize that the exam was running, and so they maxed out the time limit. And on my end, all I have to see for data is the fact that the exam was opened, the exam was viewed, and it was viewed for a total of the duration that was set. So how do you proceed with that? Do you trust what the learner is saying and say, you know what, I believe you, I'll reset that for you right now, hot diggity dog, or do you err on the side of caution? That's the situation.
Yeah, no, that's tough. So tell me about what you were thinking and what you did.
So, generally, if a learner will click on a quiz, you can tell if they messed it up because they will immediately close out of it. It might report less than a minute exposed to the quiz, and then students will immediately message and say, hey, I just messed the F up.
Hmm.
I didn't mean to do this. If you look at the time, you'll notice I was barely on the page, and I can validate that. But this was the first time that I had somebody several days after the fact reach out and max out the time. So I was like, okay, well, normally I would have been fine with resetting it, no questions asked because of the data. But since the data are not there, this is tough. So basically, I came to the conclusion that if I proctored the exam live with the student and I viewed the webcam, I viewed the screen while the student took the exam, that would be a compromise. Now, there are other semantics involved here where if the data would have come back where we fly through the quiz and we know all the answers and we aren't engaging in what I would consider a typical test taking response, I would have, and I did preface this, I said, I will administer and proctor this exam for you. However, if I suspect any sort of suspicious, unethical, academic dishonesty happening with this quiz, you will receive a zero, and that will stay a zero. So it turned out fine. I feel like everything went okay, but it was such a challenge because I had to kind of dig and figure out, is there a policy on this? There's not a policy. Is there a way that we would address this? It was on a holiday weekend as well, so if I would have reached out to peers or coworkers on a Sunday on a holiday weekend, it was likely I wasn't going to hear back in a timely manner. So yeah, it was a challenge, but I feel like it was a good compromise. But I still don't know from the learner's perspective if this was the best compromise.
Yeah, no, I think that what you're talking about, a few things. One, a lot of people don't know that a lot of the websites that are used for grading or for schools have an incredible amount of data that the instructor or teacher can access. We can see how long you are in the course. We can see how long you're on pages. We can see a whole lot of information that you would never know. That's one. And then two, I think that one of the things that you and I are trying to do is we're trying to be the professors we wish we had while also trying to keep a certain level of academic rigor that is ethical, that is moral, that stands to make sure that because this isn't just educating individuals, we are working with individuals who are going to go out into the real world and work with people in with tools that can be incredibly harmful and or incredibly helpful. So, who we release and the tools we give them and the ability to use those tools is incredibly significant. So, we need to be careful with what we do. And I think that what you're doing is trying to make sure, hey, do they not only know the content, are they operating with academic honesty? We get all of the excuses in the world, and I'm not saying they're wrong or right. I don't
It
know.
worked in the
I
past.
Exactly. When I was in my master's program, I had three grandparents who passed, and I always am told about family members passing or friends passing that
It's a
impact the
common,
lives of our students. Yeah, and there's all types of accidents or you know people go through having children, all that stuff during this process. So the validity, I just always try to be like, I believe you, especially if it comes to being sick and people are trying to tell me the what's going on with their sickness. It's like you
right?
don't
I don't
need
need the
to.
details, I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly. So you're trying to make sure that hey, how do I make sure they're able to access the content, do the work, and make sure it's done honestly? And it seems like it all worked out well.
It seemed to. And it's also about fairness to the other students. Like that's part of the academic honesty part where when I like describe some of this and why I do the thing that I do and why I make these decisions, I always emphasize it's out of fairness not only to you and I, but to your peers who don't have the opportunity and haven't engaged in the opportunity to have additional exposure to the content. And so, it's out of respect for them as well. And usually, when I throw in that on top of the whole it impacts you and me both perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I think that that also helps bring that back into perspective a little bit. And I'm usually candid from the start. When this student told me, I said, I'm going to be entirely honest, this doesn't look great.
Mm-hmm.
And she agreed. She was like, no, I understand how it looks, that's why I was concerned to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but that is a conversation we can have. And so I'm usually pretty candid, but the autism, I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
be like, hey, this is fine, it looks okay. I can't do that. I'm going to say, hey, this looks suspicious and here's a screenshot on my end and this is why it looks suspicious. So being as forthcoming as possible, I think, helps as well.
Yeah, and that transparency, that willingness to explain why and how and what really changes the dynamic. In the past, I think growing up for the both of us, we probably experienced a little bit of do it because I told you or this is the way it
Yes,
is and no further explanation.
generational.
And exactly, I shouldn't have to explain myself. You're being disrespectful by asking me to explain myself. All that is BS that needs to go up out the window because that's disrespectful in the first place. Like children are some of the most disrespected humans on earth, especially
Yes,
disabled
with
children.
no autonomy.
So, exactly. So, I think it's really important when you have that back and forth to discuss and explain and describe so that you can both come to the table understanding how to have a dialectical communication that's effective and gets everybody to where they need to go.
Absolutely.
I remember reading the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire and talking about the power imbalances between the teacher and the student, and how do you work with that? You know what I mean? how do you, as the holder of knowledge, impart that knowledge onto the next person, and still there's going to be a power imbalance. Just straight up, there is. So
Yeah.
how do you navigate that? You know what I mean? And a lot of times people don't even question that, or don't even try to navigate it, or assume that it's necessary to impose that power imbalance more. So, you know, all those questions.
Well, I mean, yeah, and the power imbalance is so evident, especially in ABA, especially in education. And so, like, the goal of a BCBA, the goal of an educator, the goal of a professor should always be how can I mitigate some of that imbalance and how can I level it as much as I possibly can while still upholding, the rules that we have. So, like, I do have the power. I can go into my learning management system and I can change the settings. I can
Mm-hmm.
allow a retake of the quiz. That is power I understand that I do have. However, I want to give some of that back to the student and say, well, you tell me how we can make this work. If we can do this in a way that helps uphold the honesty and integrity of what we're trying to do here, I'm willing to share that power with you. So, and that in ABA, we talk about autonomy, autonomy, autonomy. But like, I think people are now starting to use that as a buzzword, and it kind of bothers me because my peer and I literally wrote an assessment titled "Empowering Autonomy," um, in part because people would use independence instead of autonomy, and they didn't understand the difference between the two. But now I think people are using it, like sprinkling it around, and it's like, but you're just being performative. You're not actually thinking about the power structure and dynamics, especially with disability,
Yes,
because it overlaps significantly.
absolutely. And I think that one of the things that you're hitting on, did it leave me? Did it leave me?
It didn't leave, it's there. You just may need it.
um, yeah, well, just basically the fact that what we're thinking about, oh, yeah, so ABA and teaching and being a student and professor education, one of the things that I think that we can do better is utilizing behavior science with our students as we teach and while we teach. And I think that a lot of the times behavior analysts, professors teaching behavior analysis kind of take up the old I'm going to lecture and you're going to write notes and then give a grade. And it's like,
We know that's so ineffective.
exactly, we need to BST this thing. And also, like, one of the things that I always do is if you get a poor, incomplete, or bad grade, and you turn something in, I will almost always, as long as it's within my control, give you the opportunity to do it again, do it correctly, and earn the full score. Because if the full score, the A is the reinforcer, and we want to see the behavior occur to earn the reinforcer, then I need to give you the opportunity to try again to be able to earn the reinforcer. Because or else you're just going to leave without being able to do the behavior or skill, which then leaves a gap in your ability as a practitioner. And then I send you out as a practitioner with those gaps where you can harm people. That is wild to me.
It's
So
just
we
handing power
shouldn't.
to the wrong person.
Exactly. So in my mind, we shouldn't even be a grade level thing. It should be a did you complete the entire response requirements to the degree to be able to pass the course? You know what I mean? Just pass or you just haven't passed yet. That's how I see it should be. But the way that academia is designed requires there to be a letter grade, which don't even follow the alphabet. A, B, C, D, F. What's going on?
Well, in our model, I think it's just ABCF. I don't even think there's a D. I think it's literally just
Yeah, because we're
ABCF.
masters and PhDs. So I mean, yeah.
I mean,
So I don't know.
there's got to be a line, I guess, but it doesn't make sense to me. It never has.
It doesn't either to me, and I think that people are so used to it that they're not willing to do the work to interrogate and improve it. And that's desperately what's needed. And it would make it easier on our part, in my opinion,
Yeah.
if we designed it well. But because it's designed, in my opinion, just the way because it's designed the way it is, makes it more difficult for all parties, especially when it comes time for students to take the exam. Oh, which brings me to why I think we oftentimes teach to that BCBA exam, and there's so much that we don't teach the student because it's not on the exam that really frustrates me.
I have the same frustrations. Yikes. Yeah, there's so many different avenues we could go on this discussion, but it's always ironic to me how people who have research and knowledge of behavior science don't use it. And that
Hmm.
goes to teaching, that goes to OBM, that goes to practices that we use. Just because we read an article in Java doesn't mean we know the thing, but at the same time, like, it can open pathways. And
Hmm.
so it's like I may not be an expert in OBM, but I know there's a whole realm of OBM that I could pursue and obtain that sort of knowledge and whatnot. But at surface level, like, if we're not impacting anybody in a harmful way, like, I would argue like it's very different with feeding disorders.
Hmm.
Like, that could really be a hazard to somebody if we go in just having read an article and say, okay, now I can help this kid not choke, versus, I read this article on OBM about reinforcement strategies. This is something I can easily employ. It's low cost, blah, blah, blah. There's no harm in trying that. But it doesn't make you an expert per se. So yeah, like, with the caveat, depending on what we're talking about here, I think that there's a lot of implications that
I
we could
agree.
definitely take.
I agree. And I think that for what it's worth, I think that you did the right thing with that student. And I think that one of the things that is difficult is sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like just making it easy for the student, just letting the student
Yeah,
be able to fly through. Sometimes it means making hard decisions that may make the student not necessarily struggle, but make them make them swim. You know what I mean? Make them work to be able to do the intellectual effort to get to the terminal goal, and that is sometimes what's necessary to help them.
it's hard. Yeah, it really is, especially when those novel situations come up, because it's like, man, am I making this harder on them? Am I making this harder on me? Like, yeah, it took more time out of my day and everything, but I would rather know that the student did this with integrity than to just kind of like question everything that we did. And it's not like I stayed on the camera and just was like this the entire time that the students took the quiz. So I actually turned my camera off, I muted myself, and I said, just pretend I'm not here. Just do what you would do. Eat if you want to eat while you do it. I just don't want to see you on your phone, and I don't want to see you toggle away from that screen.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. So, but it seemed to be pretty cool, and you know, I think that it's also dependent on your behavior throughout an entire exposure period. So, like, this example was at the end of the term. The student had been a strong performer the entire time. I think that that also helps. Now, granted, you could argue that it's bias, but I also think that that speaks to we hadn't had an issue prior, we haven't
Hmm.
had any sort of struggles, and the student's always been communicative with me.
Hmm.
So it would be unusual, I think, for it to be an outlier of like academic dishonesty. And so using those cues is also helpful. And it's more difficult when these situations come up at the beginning of a term because you have no learning history with the student most of the time.
Yeah, and what is bias if not contingencies of environmental history? You know,
Good or bad. Yeah.
yeah, good or bad. I mean, these are the way that the contingencies are arranged, and these are what you have to work with, and that's where the behavior is going to go. So no, like I said, I think that you did the right thing. And sometimes it's not the easy thing. You know, sometimes it's like, okay, well, we're gonna figure out a way for you to be able to work to be able to do this. You know, it's a novel situation. That's probably why it's not in the manual or the handbook because it
Right.
almost never comes up.
But gosh darn it, I wish it were.
Yeah,
Like, this has
but
got to be an addendum somewhere. Like, come on.
yeah. I mean, hey, you could write it.
I don't want to do that, but thanks.
No, no, I
No,
know, I
no,
know.
not it. Not it.
Just like, did I just give myself some more work? Oh,
Uh, every day of my life.
yeah.
That's what I feel like I do. Yeah. Anyway,
So
We could
Yeah.
shift over too, because you wanted to talk about some current events that are happening and how that can kind of relate to um, disability.
Yeah. Um, yeah, let's shift over. So one of the things that I worry also that we don't teach well or enough or even sometimes at all in or in applied behavior analysis or even behavior analysis in general is models of disability. So when I was getting my PhD, it was in special education, so we definitely learned about this. And what the article that we had was this article, Models of Disability, a brief overview. I think it's really great.
That's the exact one I pulled up. I just want to, because we didn't communicate about which articles we pulled up. That's hilarious.
That's fantastic. So no, so this is the article. This is the seminal article on models of disability, and I think it's really a good article
It's a
because
great
basically
article.
what it says is a model is a set of assumptions about what a disability is, where it comes from, and what should be done about it. And these models are not neutral. They determine who has power over disabled people's lives, what policy looks like, and even how disabled people see themselves. Every therapy goal, every IEP, every eligibility decision, every sermon, there's a model in there. The question is whether you've examined it or not. And this article kind of goes over like the different models of disability. Now, I could go over the article, but I kind of distilled it into this little thing right here, disability at a glance. So 10 of these models: the moral or religious one, where disability as a divine act, a punishment, a test of faith, or a spiritual gift; a medical model, disability as a disease, a body defect to be fixed or managed by professionals. Yep. Social disability as a social construct. Society disables people by excluding them. Identity and affirmation. Disability as a positive identity, a minority group to celebrate, not just accommodate. Human rights. Disability as a rights issue. Disabled people hold full civil and social rights. Cultural disability as a cultural location. Institutions and media manage disabled people against their will. And there's charity, economic. There's limits, and there's neurodiversity, which is disability as a natural variation. A neurological difference is human variation, not disorder. And all of these models have strengths and weaknesses. I will say some have fewer strengths and more limitations than others. But you can see here, yeah, like moral religious
Looking at you,
offers.
medical. Looking at you.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, our readers or our listeners and watchers can read these and pause to read, but and I'm not going to go over all of them unless you want to. But I just thought that I'd share that this is important because our model of disability shapes, like I said, how we view it, and then what we do, quote unquote, about disabled people or with disabled people or for disabled people. And if you don't think about this, you're not really understanding why you're making what decisions you're making and what strengths or weaknesses those decisions have. What say you?
I have so many opinions and thoughts. This is something, I've been diving into a lot since I basically found the ABA reform movement and, kind of discovering my own neurodivergent identity. I think it's also important. Let me see if I can now share this small portion of the article. So you kind of touched on this, but like disability models do so many things within our structures, our social constructs, and it impacts our perception of so many things. And I think that if nothing else, you take away these points because, there's not value neutrality in models of disability. We see models guide formation and policy. So all of these big level issues trickle down and they impact people directly. So prejudice, discrimination comes from models of disability, etc. Now, if you are an ABA, you are exposed to the medical model primarily. The medical model is very outdated, it's very flawed. It looks at those of us with disabilities as needing to be fixed, which is just, kind of gross in and of itself. It's loosely tied into the moral and religious model. So basically saying, hey, there's something wrong here, and it blames the individual. And so that's what we don't want to do, because we literally can't help disability. It is what it is. Especially given that this is the one demographic that at any point anybody could become a part of. And so I always find that so interesting. And it's like, you don't realize that you're a slip and fall away from disability, or that you are one bad car accident away from a traumatic brain injury, or whatever the case may be. At any point you could join us. And so while I think that we have a fantastic community, the way we look at it can be really flawed. So in ABA, in particular, we are still focused on the medical model. And part of that is because of legislation and policy that comes down from sources of payment. If you're working in private insurance sector, for instance, you are finding that you have to use the medical model. I have many students who challenge me on language and terminology, because even at the very, very least, I know if you're using outdated terms, that you're not implementing the correct models. So changing that verbal behavior is basically step one, and then we kind of work on the bigger picture. So how does that shape your behavior in practice? So yeah, with that medical model, saying somebody has deficits, I will challenge a student and say, how about we say support needs? That's what I choose to use. I'm low support needs. Instead of saying that somebody has a deficit, which sounds so messed up, because it's saying that something's wrong with this person. Maybe we just didn't develop at the same rate as somebody else. Everybody develops differently, and everybody develops at different rates for different areas of their existence. So, I get pushback all the time. It's like, well, when I submit a plan to insurance, they require me to use that word. That doesn't make it right. So challenging those systems. And when those things come up, I have ways to work around that and mitigate it. But it's important to kind of preface some of this discussion around that context, is that you've probably been mostly exposed to the medical model as a practitioner, as a student, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. And I think that what you were talking about right there, the language we use is so important. And one of the things that I learned very early on is, especially when there are non-vocal or low vocal behavior children, people feel as if they could speak any kind of way about them, around them. And that really irks me, because they
Same.
hear it all. Just because they're not speaking to you does not mean that they don't understand what's being said around them.
Same.
So
So
changing
good.
the language we use, selecting which language we use intentionally, really, really is a game changer, and it helps change the way you see things.
Yeah, it does. And that's a really good starting point for discussion. This is the one thing I don't like about not teaching practicum any longer, is because we would have these discussions and we would talk about, first step is we change our language. Okay, now what does that actually mean? Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. What are some examples you've had where you've changed how you've done something before and how you do it differently now because of that framework? And it really does seem to help by starting with the small behavior and building on that. So if you don't have a basic understanding of some of the terms or some of the framework that we would talk about with language under these different models, feel free to ask, because there are so many examples, especially with insurance companies and doctors and all of that, that it's still, there's a reason why a lot of people are still not getting diagnosed who probably should be get diagnosed, because we have outdated ideas and frameworks that we're still using that should probably not be used any longer. So it's just systemic.
Absolutely. One of the words that I hate that people use, that I have to train out of them every semester, every term,
Oh my gosh, that'll probably be
um,
one I hate too.
maladaptive.
Oh my god, I hate that one too. Or inappropriate.
Or inappropriate. So, like,
Same.
maladaptive, for those who don't know, is commonly used by practitioners to describe behavior that is undesirable to others, or in the individual's environment, including caregivers, teachers, peers, and family members. And your favorite book, the Cooper book, even says that there's a quote that it says, even though a child's maladaptive behaviors may be exceedingly annoying to others or even damaging physically, those undesirable responses have proven functional for the child. That is
Give
the
Cooper that.
maladapt. Excuse me?
I'll give Cooper that one.
Yeah. He says that is the maladaptive behavior has worked for the child in the past by producing reinforcers and or helping the child avoid or escape punishers. So
So it is
using that,
adaptive.
yes, it is adaptive. The behavior is adaptive. If it's occurring, it's adaptive. So saying it's maladaptive is not only incorrect, like
It's wrong.
scientifically, it's incorrect, like morally, in my opinion, or
You're
ethically.
wrong.
So
Stop being wrong.
so you could say it's a interfering behavior. We could find other words to describe
Inconvenient behavior.
inconvenient,
I just say
harmful.
target. Like,
Yeah,
it's just a neutral target behavior because any other term sometimes puts a bias against the learner, and that bothers me every time. The one I hate as well is problem behavior
yeah,
because it's like a problem to whom? Because it's
yeah,
not a problem for the learner because they're doing the thing. It's a problem
exactly.
to everyone around the learner, and that shows your power sits with those around the learner. And I hate it, mic drop.
Yes,
Throw that out there.
I love it, and that's why I like what you said about target behavior. And I would even go as far as to say, if you don't use the word target, the term target behavior, say what the behavior is. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Is it hitting, biting, spitting, kicking, eloping, self-injurious behavior? Like all of these, we have terms for the thing that we're talking about. If you use the
Right.
term aggressive instead, then all of a sudden they become the aggressive kid, and then that stigma sticks with
Yeah.
them for perpetuity. Even when the behavior decelerates near zero levels, because once we know if the behavior is in your repertoire, it can have spontaneous recovery. But even if it's at near zero levels and it hasn't happened in for months or maybe even years, students will still have that stigma stick with them as they move as the aggressive kid. So using that term aggression is terrible. We understand that there's an entire response class you're trying to aim for. Let's say what those responses are and see if our intervention are decelerating those behaviors and accelerating the behavior we want to see, or we think that is going to be more beneficial for getting them what they want in their lives or what they need.
This is why the conversations that we usually have about intersectionality, sorry, are so important because when we're talking about stigma and we're talking about those labels sticking with a particular learner, if you have a specific demographic of a learner, those labels are going to be even more imperative to determine, okay, this is going to be stigmatizing because the last thing you want to do is send like a young black boy who can generally be labeled as aggressive to begin with very easily out into the world with these labels of aggression and, set him up, if you will, for all sorts of problems with law enforcement or people in positions of authority. Well, they have an aggressive past. Okay, well, I've been pushed, I've been hit, I've been kicked, I've been bit by learners of all genders, all races.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the more neutral the term, the more we are respecting them and their intersectional identities. And it goes into that as well because everything's about gender, everything's about race, everything's about our intersectional identities. In this society, it is what it is. And so we have to work at leveling that out as well. And this is a way that we can do that and be the allies that we need to for our learners.
Exactly. I agree. And, somebody say, oh, they have an aggressive history. Do you not have a, who is
I do.
human who doesn't have an
We
aggressive?
all
Have you
have
ever,
skeletons in the closet.
yeah, if you pushed one person once, you have an aggressive history. There is aggression in your history. Now, so it's just, we have to change the way that we talk about people and behavior. And it's really difficult when our our field is mired in such harmful rhetoric, behavior, and procedures and practices. So we're doing the work to unpack and revise those things and it gets tiresome. It gets tiring. But I think it's really important to do the work because one, because I guess the science isn't going anywhere, but even more importantly is we have the technology to make incredibly beneficial impacts upon people's lives, upon our own lives, and to use them in the best ways possible can really bring the best of humanity out, and we know that. So that's what we're doing, what we're working towards. And a lot of people that don't understand the science, I don't think know that, or just don't see that, or don't see it often enough. Um, yeah.
Excuse my
So
ring. Oh.
that brings me to this conversation I wanted to have quickly about reinforcement. Just like I've learned online, people simply are not talking about reinforcement the same way we're talking about it. They don't have the same language. They're not like I had to like I want to make this video where I'm saying like, hey, when I'm talking about reinforcement and what you're talking about often are different people, people online. When I'm
Yeah.
talking about reinforcement, when you turn the doorknob and push the door open, that behavior is reinforced by you being able to have access to the new room and escape from the previous room. There goes my dog's butt.
I was thinking of it like a cat in that situation, so it was actually really good timing that you had a pet come by. So
Yep, yep. Well, yeah, she is basically a cat, honestly. She acts like a cat.
love that.
But
Yeah, I
yeah,
hate the
so
closed door thing. So yeah,
yeah, I mean, so that behavior is being reinforced, right? But people so often always think about an M&M being a reinforcer, right? But the only reason why people give stickers or M&Ms or whatever they give is because the behavior we're interested in increasing isn't coming into contact with the potential reinforcer. And I say potential because you don't know if it's a reinforcer. Just because you gave an
it's
M&M
the effect on the
doesn't mean
behavior. It's a preferred
exactly.
stimulus. That's another fight I have with students. It's like, no,
Yes.
we don't know yet. We are
Mm-hmm.
hypothesizing. If you do a preference assessment, that is not the same. It does not equate to a reinforcer assessment.
Yeah, and in reinforcers change across time based upon your environmental contingencies. I'm trying not to go too deep into it, but I can't like not say your EOs and your AOs, your establishing operations and your abolishing operations. What's happening? What's motivating you? Are you hungry now? Then food is a more desirable reinforcer. But if you're not, you need to have something else. So if that's one of the problems with using food is once you use too much of it, it's no longer going to work as a reinforcer.
Or it's really hard to fade out of, and then it becomes ethically unstable.
Exactly.
I think an underlying theme here is, and this goes into the model of disability as well discussion, is autonomy. And like, I think that that is so important. So, autonomy is basically the idea that a person can dictate and make their own life decisions. And so, when we talk about reinforcers, well, we've been given tokens and the behavior's not changing. Okay, then it's not preferred by the learner. So then we need to figure out what is preferred so that we can see if it has that effect on behavior. It still may not match the value of the reinforcer to the behavior itself. I can't even talk matching law today. It's just been like one of those weeks. So I'm loosely connecting to the matching law folks. So that said, preferences, preferences, preferences. That even goes down to models of disability. If I don't want to be spoken about with person first language, don't talk about me with person first language. And I don't, for the record. I am an
Mm-hmm.
autistic person. So, that's the thing. It's, are we giving people the power to make their own decisions? Are we having the power available to them to assume their own identity? That's what ultimately all of this comes down to. And practitioners gatekeep all of that.
Absolutely. Which means that if you're the practitioner utilizing the medical model, you're thinking that you're doing the right thing for the community you think that you're supposed to save.
And you may not be aware of it. Like,
Yeah.
we're not saying you're a bad person. We're just saying that the actions you may not understand are a part of a bigger issue.
Yeah.
Now you know.
Yeah. You know better, do better. And it's the opportunity to learn. And one of the things that I've noticed that I want your take on
God,
is
do you?
I've noticed, yeah, I've noticed that parents often dislike identity first, and
Yes.
they would rather person first, even when their child tells them they prefer identity first.
It's so interesting because every panel I've ever been on for disability justice and disability rights, this always comes up. And they're like, what do you do if. So, like, I love that you brought this up because it's important conversation. But, it's one of those things like you talk about, like, every term I have to go over this and this and this. It's like I feel at this point everyone should know, and I kind of forget that everybody's in a different part of their journey. And so I always have to step back and say, cool your jets. People don't know still. So, as someone from my perspective, and I usually like to disclose I am white, I was diagnosed late in life, I perform loosely neurotypicality to where I went under the radar for many, many years, but now it's like so obvious. It's like, how could you even miss this? Um, I have privilege, is what I'm trying to say. Now, one thing could be said about that where I could be passing, um, but I would have loved in elementary school where I have all of these traumatic memories of having major anxiety about going to school every day and not knowing what to expect and being scared of dogs. I was terrified of dogs as a kid. I guess that's like a common thing with a lot of autistic girls in particular. I'm finding that. Like terrified because I didn't know what they were going to do. Are they going to jump on me? Are they going to knock me over? Are they going to bite me? Are they going to lick me? Like all of it was scary. All these different things, like the fact that I didn't want to interact with people if I had nothing to say to them. I would rather read a book than go out on the playground and play. I would have loved for someone to sit down and tell me, hey, you're autistic and that's why you do things differently. It doesn't make it bad. Because I felt like it was bad for so long because everyone was like, oh, well, she's so shy and all this stuff. She's so withdrawn, blah, blah, blah. She's so weird. I had all of those things said about me, and I would have loved to be like, I'm not weird, I'm autistic. Learn about it. I would have loved that power. Now, I think, like, I can't speak for my parents. My father's a jerk. I don't talk to him. My mother is learning more about disability and like all this, and I think she's realizing like she has her own neurodivergence and stuff. I don't know that. I grew up in the 90s. Things were very different. I don't know that the stigma of having a daughter with a mental health condition would have been accepted, but I think my mom would have done her best. I think she would have been a very loud advocate. My mom is the type that if she sees something wrong, she'll say it.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll say it really loud, almost to the point where it's like, Mom, that's too much. Okay, let's scale it down a little. People are staring. But my father would have been absolutely ashamed, absolutely mortified, because that would have reflected poorly on him. By the way, he's 100% on the spectrum. That's where I got this.
Mm.
Um,
It's usually the
so,
dad.
shout out to my jerk of a father. Um, like he'll ever see this anyway, it's fine. That's like the nicest thing I could say about him, though, to be honest. So I think that having the diagnosis is a privilege. I know some people don't always perceive it as a privilege, depending on your identity, but I would have loved that knowledge. It would have really saved me from a lot of confusion, especially going into adolescence and high school. I felt like I didn't fit in. And I still have moments where I look around as an adult and I'm like, my goodness, if I didn't have my autistic friends, I would still feel that way, even with a diagnosis. So, I think it brings up, I know this is a really long way to answer your question. I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm just babbling. But when people approach and they say, how do I approach a family who won't respect the identity first perspective, even if the kid's on board with it or whatever, I say that it's a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for the family, and it's a time for you as the advocate for your learner, who you are serving primarily, to help them express themselves. So if the learner's like, I am autistic, that's how my friends identify, that's how I feel about it, that's an opportunity for you to assist your learner in helping them find their voice. I've had conversations with individuals before and said, ultimately it's their decision. Like, it's their identity. You can't decide, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bi? Whatever. It's just how you are. The same thing kind of goes with autism. It's like, I either know I identify with this community or I don't, and I'm going to accept it as part of my identity. I can't take it off. It's literally my
Mm-hmm.
framework. It's like you used an example. I think it was before we started recording. Like, I am a person with blackness. Like that's you can't take that off. It's just who
Mm-hmm.
you are. It's your entire experience. And so once you kind of have those conversations with families, now some of it is cultural. There are still some cultures that are very far behind in the way we look at disability, and we would argue that they're more of the moral and religious model, which to me
Yeah.
is super scary. And I was partly raised in a situation like that where it was kind of assumed I was kind of raised in a cult as well. So just to add out my weirdness, let's just round all this out. Um, yeah, there's still a lot of that backwards thinking as far as like, what did I do to deserve this child who has these different needs and acts different? But also some of it is society. And so depending on the environment that the individuals are in and their survival mechanisms or whatever, I think it just opens up a conversation. Now, I also have the conversation with individuals where if you suppress an individual and they have expressed how they want to identify, let me know in 15 years how that works out for you because your child may not want to talk with you any longer.
Yep. Yep.
Because that's what's happened with me.
Yep. And you brought up some stuff that I wanted to talk about.
I brought up a lot. I'm
One,
so sorry.
no, no, you're good. You brought up a lot of good ideas and thoughts, and I'm glad that you expressed that so well and at length because it really helps. I think one of the things is if you're a parent and you have a problem with your child using identity first language, I think you need to unpack that. Why do you feel upset or concerned or frustrated or whatever
Or
you're feeling?
embarrassment.
Or embarrassed. So what underlying feelings going on that makes you say no to that to your child that's telling you how they want to be identified as? That's one. And then two, I've heard and I've seen a lot of times where a kid will have a diagnosis and nobody will
And
have
I tell them,
told that kid
right,
exactly that they have that
that.
diagnosis. What do you think about that? Could you talk to us about that?
First off, if we're tiptoeing around something like that, guess what happens? The learner is going to adopt that perspective and that mentality toward it, and then they're going to internalize it. So, like, if people are like, oh my God, we can't talk about this with the learner. Now, if you approach it like it's a crisis, the learner is going to then think there's something wrong with them. And that is
Mm-hmm.
wrong. So wrong. I can't even. Um, and that's the thing. Like, I'm more of the neurodiversity model, and I don't think anybody's brain is the same. I've seen way too many differences. There are so many spectrums of different diagnoses that we can't all be the same. Like, there are. I think of like even within autism and like my friends who are autistic in autistic spaces, there's a Venn diagram. A lot of us overlap on certain things, but then there are like outliers that we don't overlap on. Those of us who have like more of that overlap tend to like group together. And, it might be Minecraft because, like there's a big group of us that love Minecraft. And then, somebody might say the stereotypical trains. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have those things that we do share in common, but there's also incompatibility with neurodivergence. And so, like, I use the example, for instance, I am very not okay with random loud noises. And so when I am around a neurodivergent person who may vocally, express themselves in a way that is aversive to me and my sensory needs, that can be incompatibility. That doesn't mean I don't want to be around this person. That just means I may have to have headphones. I may have to, figure out my stuff. It may mean that I don't hang out with that person as much as I do with somebody who doesn't do those things. But
Mm-hmm.
it just reflects to the spectrum. And so, yeah, like withholding, and I don't see it as like anything other than, but withholding somebody's identity could actually be pretty detrimental. Um, if somebody, I'm going to be entirely honest, your kid knows if they're different. Like, they already know
Mm-hmm.
because all these adults are over here, like, whispering about them and stuff like that. It's like you said, we're in the room, but we're going to talk about this thing like they're not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
They're not dumb. Like, they know you're talking about them, regardless of whether they can hear you or not. And so there's a big secret. If you let them in on it, guess what? They're going to respect you a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And just having the explanation, like, hey, no two people's brains are the same. Yours works like this. And if you ever have questions, we can go to the doctor and we can talk about it, or we can go to the psychiatrist and talk about it. But it just means that, we might have to have noise canceling headphones because you don't like the sounds that happen when you're out in public or whatever. The way you frame it is vital.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And I think that helping them understand what's going on with themselves gives them power, you know, instead of just worrying about why am I different? Why don't I feel like I'm right or correct or like everyone else? And that can be an incredibly alienating and terrifying feeling, especially for a child who's trying to learn how to navigate the world.
Yeah, during the formative years and everything, like I think back, especially I keep going back to middle school. I'm like, man, if somebody could
Ugh.
have just pulled me aside and said, "Hey, here's what's going on," oh my gosh, things would have been so much easier.
And
That's the
and
thing. Like, do you want your kid to play the game on hard extreme mode without a tutorial, or do you want them to have a tutorial?
exactly. I remember growing up. So like the ableism now compared to like when we were growing up, the ableism was a lot more rampant. I mean, I'm sure before
Very.
then it was
It
even
still
more
happens,
rampant.
but it's
But
like way worse.
yeah, I remember when in middle school when some girls were talking about how one boy learned that he was dyslexic, and you would have thought that it was like the worst thing in the world. And the way that they were talking about it. Now, this is my first introduction into what dyslexic is or dyslexia is, and the way the inflection in their voice and the tone and the words that they selected at the time. I was young enough, and I still remember understanding. I don't know what that means, but it must be bad. So
The tone, the delivery, the
yeah.
words that you choose to use. And that's the thing, it's a choice. Like, if we choose to speak badly about somebody and we choose that vocal language, then we perpetuate that bias and that stigma.
Yeah, and it's also learned. You know what I mean? So where did they learn that it was bad? Because this is me learning
Ugh.
that it's bad. Exactly. So I mean, what's going on with the parents? What's going on with the schools? What's going on with the environments that they operate around? That will tell you. I mean, one of the things that this is tangentially related. One of the things that I've noticed is like it's like okay, if somebody engages in racist behavior, that means that they have racism within their verbal community. And then if they have racism, chances are that the other isms are likely to follow suit very quickly. So somebody that's using racist language to me is going to hit me with the R slur pretty quickly. And then they might try to do some homophobic stuff and then some patriarchy, and then it all just kind of ties together really in a nice little white supremacy culture bundle that is packaged neatly and handed off to me, and I'm just it's really interesting to see. And one of the things that I've started to do, especially online, is if I'm talking about something that I'm frustrated with, like a racist or ableism or homophobia, and someone says cry about it, one of the things I do now is I'm like, oh, do you think that crying is bad or wrong?
Yeah.
Like immediately just like clock it like that, and a lot of times they don't even respond to that. If I respond with something else, they'll like try to keep going, but then
So
that really
they've
gets
affected
them.
you. They haven't
Yeah,
affected you.
yeah, and then that gets them like, oh well, I can't say that, you know what I mean? It's like how depraved do you want to go with this account, and do you think that you're hidden
Right.
enough behind that autonomy so that it won't come back to you?
And on certain social spaces, like when you comment on things, like all of your friends can see it. And it's like, are you really going to show your cards like this? Because, yeah, and I call it the incel package deal that you describe with, okay, well, if there's racism, there's also homophobia, and there's also xenophobia, and ableism, and all of that. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's almost like society's set up that way to where you have a group who fits outside of all these norms that wants to stay in power. That's so weird how that works.
Mm-hmm.
Bizarre.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, our language is definitely a foundation of how our behavior can change in larger ways. And so it's step one. Like, are you using only identity first, or are you only using person first language? We need to step back and unpack that. There's research articles that I will put in the resources that talk about how we actually primarily prefer identity first language within
Yeah.
the overall disability community, which you've already touched on a little bit. It's not just autism, it's, the hard of hearing and deaf community, it's other communities as well. And so, what does the person prefer? What does the person see themselves as? That's what we should be doing. We should be supporting their identity, regardless of if we agree with how they identify or not. That's so silly.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think that that's really important. And I think it's something that people have to learn because for a
Yes.
long time, people were like told person first, and they were told this is the right way, only one right way, and this is the right way. And there's more nuance to it. Um, so yeah.
There's actually, so like a lot of people will throw back um, the APA formatting guidelines, but APA, the American Psychological Association, actually released an addendum that focused on, who might want to identify in which way. Um, see, so this is from the American Psychological Association. So, like, that argument is void and null because even the APA at this point has been like, hey, we have research that shows that people shockingly can identify how they want to identify and tell us how they want to identify. What? So, it kind of goes into the explanation of person first, identity first, when to use them. Like, I have my own guidelines on doing that, but I also am an author of research and stuff. So I use what I prefer in my community. Of course, some examples are here and everything. I'll make sure that this is linked as well, but just kind of
Hmm.
having an understanding of that initially was a guideline, but it also got updated. For some reason, people don't seem to find the addendum.
Yeah. And also APA was late. all of
They were very
these
late.
all of these institutions are late to these things, and just because there's a rule or law or whatever in right now does not mean it's morally, ethically, or legitimately correct. It's
Right.
just the way that somebody who has power selected. That's it.
I've used the measure lately where, a lot of people ask occasionally. I know we've kind of talked about ABAI, it's kind of a bad word in our house. That let's just assume that ABA finally just like corrected all the issues we all have with it. Would I go
Hmm.
back to it? And at this point, no, I wouldn't, because it took this long and this much effort for you to even consider changing, that the longer it takes for you to actually make that change, the less respect I have for you. Because it shouldn't take all of these people, all of these resources, all of this time, all of this advocacy for you to just kind of self-reflect and not even make a change, if you're even self-reflecting. So let that learning history have an impact as well. And so, APA, they were delayed. I will give them that they were quicker than other things.
Yeah.
So, plus I have to
APA.
follow it.
Yeah, and APA usually is better than ABAI and the BACB. I think a lot of people aren't really
Maybe
going
it's
to
way behind.
understand. Yeah, I think a lot of people aren't going to really understand what you just said about how if ABAI fixed everything, you still probably wouldn't go back to it. So I'm going to situate it in another context.
Yeah,
I watched this
please.
TikTok earlier today that was great, and she said, I don't understand how people get mad at me when I don't forgive somebody for being racist. If you engage in racist behavior, call me the N word or whatever, and you apologize and I don't forgive you, that's okay for me to not forgive you.
Hmm.
People be like, oh, well, they might
Oh
not change or
well.
whatever. That's not on me. You're the racist, so
Yeah.
you gotta change. And I don't have to forgive you whether or not you change. You should
Right.
be changing to be a better person. So, ABAI, whether or not people decide to come back to you if and when, hopefully when, you do make all of these necessary changes,
this right now.
People don't have to forgive you. You did harm, so some people will, some people won't. That's the way it works. When there's harm done, not everybody in the community is going to forgive. That's the way of life. And you got to move along with it. You should still change the problem behavior regardless of whether or not somebody else is going to forgive. The changed behavior shouldn't be for forgiveness, it should be for improvement.
Absolutely. And that's a beautiful contextual example. Yeah, maybe it's the autism in me, but I will hold a grudge. I will hold a grudge. The bigger the grudge, the longer you have not changed. That's,
Yeah, and I will hold it too because I'll be like, somebody will be back in the news and I'll be like, they did something that, and I don't mess with them anymore. What did they do? Like, I'll forget what they did, but I won't forget that they did something. And I'll look it up and I'll be like, I knew I was right. I knew you was doing some shady stuff. All right, we still don't mess with them. We still don't rock with them. You know?
that reminds me of like when P. Diddy finally started getting like called out for everything. It's like we knew for years, people were saying it, but then I think it was when that Cassie video dropped. We were all like,
Yeah.
oh, now maybe we'll actually do something about this.
And
Um, yeah.
for the record, I just want to say that I've been a P. Diddy hater my whole life, especially as somebody on the West Coast who grew up listening to Tupac, and he
Uh,
hated P. Diddy. I didn't know all of the reasons why I needed to hate P. Diddy, but I definitely didn't like his quote unquote music, didn't like him, and some people will get this reference, being in all the videos, dancing and
right.
singing. I hated him. I just didn't know all the reasons why, and I hate when people say that. So it's funny that I'm saying it now, but I did have some reasons. But like everything I learned about him just added more and more as to why I
Right.
hated him. And it's difficult. Nowadays, every everybody that you know and love is going to disappoint you. Like that's
Oh, yeah.
flat out yes,
In
that's
different
true.
levels, yeah,
Different
absolutely.
levels though, because like you really like an artist, you'll
Some of
learn
it'll
some
come out.
stuff and you'll just be like, let me delete all of their stuff from my playlists. And you know what? You can live without it. I've been living without listening to Drake and Kanye West for the past couple years, and I'm fine.
Kanye still disappoints me because that first album that was super pop, I don't know, what was it? I can't remember. It had
College
like,
dropout.
yeah, oh my God, it was so good. That one still pains me because I really liked that album.
Yeah, I mean,
But
yeah. I mean, I'll give it all up. There's other music I could play. You know what I mean? And there's different levels of disappointment. And also we have to understand nobody's perfect, but like there are certain levels where it's just like that's an offense so egregious that I'm not willing to patronize. I'm not willing to pay for your services.
yeah,
I'm not willing to
they don't
engage
deserve your
with your
patronage.
art. Yes, exactly. Thank you.
They don't
And
deserve any of ours.
yeah, that goes with being in the 21st century. You know what I mean? I don't know a lot about Picasso, so I didn't have a TikTok. So I'm sure if you
Oh,
learn about him though,
where do we
you'll
start?
you'll find some stuff. You know?
Do you notice how my face lights up when we start talking about bad things people do? Or like bad people? I'm just like, oh, let me tell you some facts. Like,
Yeah.
I'm such a. You're too young for this, but do you remember like the Debbie Downer thing on Saturday Night Live, the sketch with
Yes, I've seen
Fresh?
it a lot. Yeah.
Like, I relate to that so much because I'm always dropping the depressing facts on people. It's fine. It's fine. It makes me unique.
The more you learn, the more depressing facts you learn. That's just the way the world is,
Ignorance is bliss.
unfortunately. Oh
That's what
yeah.
they mean by it.
They're so happy. People that
Yeah,
don't know stuff are
naive.
so happy. They look like they're living the best life.
They
And I'm
are
just
because
like,
they're
oh,
just naive. And I, there are times that I choose, like, I know there's a lot of things happening right now in this country. I have chosen to not engage with a lot of it yet because I know I don't have the spoons for it. But once I know that, it's going to be pretty heavy on me. And I don't want to think too much
yeah,
into it because I will internalize it. And I will at least say that, like, the longer you live and have these experiences, you can start setting boundaries, which does help. However, I just wish sometimes I could have just been naive and not been aware of all of it. Existentialism sucks.
Exactly. And there's nuance in that. There's a nuance between being informed and safe and being and choosing to not be informed and being mentally healthy.
Yeah,
So like you have to find your balance throughout your boundaries.
very, very well said.
Yep. Well, make sure you like and subscribe, comment, um, share with a friend
Or an enemy.
or an enemy. Yes, send it to your enemy.